our Marine Corps veteran and speaker for today. Thank you, Don.
You're welcome.
Here, let me hook you up. This right here. There you go. And then put this right here. All right.
Well, I'm wired. I really feel inadequate after hearing the guest speakers you have here, and I did attend the presentation for the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. I'm just a lowly Marine sergeant. I really feel inadequate being here. I want to talk about a different aspect of the Vietnam War that not many people are aware of. I served primarily in a combined action program in Vietnam. I'm not going to go over my history. It's on the bio. That's very well done by Ed. The combined action program was started as a way to try to have some buy-in from the South Vietnamese people. We wanted to enrich their training, their living conditions. It was the beginning of the pacification and the Vietnamization of the war in Vietnam. The Army tried a program similar to this on a huge scale, and they brought large units of soldiers in with all the accompanying people, officers, and I think it was commanded by a colonel, and it didn't work well at all. Now, in Vietnam, most of the officers in the Army were corrupt. The local people did not trust officers at all. So the Marine Corps said, well, let's try this on a smaller scale. Take the officers out of it, and we're going to try this with one rifle squad, be about 13, 14 guys, commanded by a sergeant, an 85 sergeant. Maybe we can get some trust and build some trust with the local people. So they formed the Combined Action Unit. It was a combined action unit where a squad of Marines would move into a village. Now, let me backtrack here for a minute. There were two different combined action programs during the Vietnam War. The early program, which I served in, and then a later program that I don't know a whole lot about. The program I served in was the stationary combined action program, where we moved into a village and we lived there and melded ourselves in with the villagers. We were there to train the local militia, called PFs, Popular Forces, and arm them, train them, and help them learn how to protect their village. When you get to the village, you realize very soon that there aren't many military-age people there. Most of the young men had either been legitimately drafted by the army of the South Vietnamese Army, or coerced into serving the Viet Cong. Most of the Viet Cong were not communists. They were there because threats were made that if you don't serve us, we're going to do terrible things to your family. So we got there, and most of the PFs, most of the Popular Forces were like mid-teenagers. They were 14, 15, 16 years old. Maybe a couple of them as old as 20, but the vast majority of them were teenagers, because that's really all that was left in the village. We formed a unit of about 45 PFs, about a company, and we broke into four fire teams of 3 Marines each. And the 3 Marines each had a group of about 15 of the PFs. We would take these PFs and we would train them in military tactics, train them in firearms, and then we would actually patrol with those units. We also did a lot of civic action work. There again, the Viet Cong were coming in and they were stealing all the food, they were poisoning wells, killing animals, doing that type of thing. So another part of our mission was to help with the civic action. We rebuilt school buildings. We had other resources. We called the engineers in to actually dig a deep well instead of the little surface well that had been dug there with just shovels. They'd come in with heavy equipment and drill a well when we needed it, and help us construct buildings. So we had those resources that we brought in, and the villagers became our villagers. We knew them, we ate with them, we lived with them, and we knew them as part of a family. We're not your typical Vietnam veterans. Most veterans of any war really don't have a good taste about the people that they were protecting. Most Vietnam veterans don't think of the enemy as people. They're gooks. There are all kinds of different names. We didn't invent that. Those of you from World War II served in Europe. Did you ever kill a German gentleman? No. It was a crowd. It was a Nazi. I mean, you dehumanize the enemy to sort of convince yourself in your own mind that you're not murdering people. They're sort of subhuman. Nobody ever killed a Japanese person. They killed Japs. They killed Nips. So that was the kind of attitude that most Vietnam veterans came back with, because they never personally knew anybody. They didn't know them as people. We did. And we came back as a different group of people, a different group of Marines that had different feelings towards the Vietnamese people. We started in Vietnam with our Combined Action Unit. Give you an idea here. Vietnam is, somebody just measured here, it's about 750 miles long. I was with the 3rd Marine Division, and we served in what's called the I Corps area. Vietnam is broken into 4 corps. I Corps being the further north, and then 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and 4 Corps. Our unit was based right here on the demilitarized zone. Con Tien, which sits right on the demilitarized zone, right next to Vietnam, we served there. We served all over that area. In fact, just an interesting side note, the Angel Fire, that was founded by Dr. Westphal, whose son was killed out of Con Tien. He was a lieutenant in the Marine Corps. He was out on patrol and was killed there at Con Tien. Con Tien means Hill of Angels. And Dr. Westphal didn't know that at the time, but he went to Angel Fire and built this memorial. The chapel there is a very unique shape. It's something that you won't see again. The shape is the exact outline of the combat base at Con Tien. Dr. Westphal didn't know any of that at the time, but just coincidentally, he built it a place named very much like where his son was killed, and the shape that he just dreamed up as a sort of unique shape was the shape of the combat base. Little sidelight there for you. So we served up here in this area right here. We never got further south than probably Quai Son, which was about, 7 to 8 miles from the demilitarized zone. Most of our work took place at this handy little map on this handout here. Our village was located put my eyes on. Our village was located in the Camp Carroll area. And you see it on the small map. And that's where we operated out of, was Camp Carroll. I got too many cords here. We operated out of the Camp Carroll area, which was right up in here. Our fire teams and our squads, like I said, were made up of about 15 PFs and usually three Marines. We went on a 4-day duty cycle. The first day typically would be to do a daytime patrol in the area. We'd take our PFs and the 3 of us would go out and just patrol the area around our village. The second day we would do a nighttime patrol, either patrol or an ambush. And there again we'll be out at night with 2 other Marines and 15 teenagers. That was our second day. Our third day was typically to do what we called a med cap. We would take our Navy corpsman, our medic, and one of these squads would go out into the village, and this was another part of the pacification process. We'd go out in the village and we would set up at different places. And this happened every day. One of the squads was doing this every single day. So we had rallying points where all the people in the area knew where the Marines were going to be at roughly different times of the day. The medic would treat them for anything from disease to combat injuries, shrapnel injuries, farming injuries, anything. We would treat the people and trying to to win the hearts and minds, the civic action part of the program. Third day, we were just sort of a lazy day. We just sat in the village and provided security to the village. Now, a village is made up of a series of hamlets in Vietnam. So our village that we were primarily located in is where the village elders were, and the local government seat was there. So it was a hot target for the Viet Cong. So we would stay there in the village. The PFs that have the day off, and the three Marines would just hang out there with the village elders, and just sort of a lax day, but providing security to the local government. And then we start all over again. Yeah.
Were the Marines in uniform?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. I was conversant in Vietnamese. I could converse, not fluent by any means. Now, the Combined Action Program was an all-volunteer program. You had to have had 6 months combat experience, and what did I say? What's the magic word that turned those lights off? So you had to have 6 months combat experience, a recommendation from your commanding officer, and a willingness to stay at least another 6 months in Vietnam. If you were selected for the program, you got sent to China Beach down here. I say down here in Vietnam. That was pretty far south for us. Went down there to the CAP school. In the CAP school, we learned rudimentary Vietnamese. We learned Vietnamese customs. We learned we got refreshers on small unit tactics. We got a lot of training in how to be instructors and how to teach people, because we were just, a bunch of grunts. Most of us didn't have any experience in leadership. We had experience in leadership. We didn't have experience with teaching people. We weren't instructors, so we had a lot of time there. We spent 2 weeks at Combined Action School. So yes, we did learn some rudimentary Vietnamese. You learn more when you actually get out and start using it. And
villagers that spoke English?
Between the little bit of English they knew and the little bit of Vietnamese we knew, we could communicate. None of them were fluent in English by any means, and none of us were fluent in Vietnamese. I traveled around the world, and I've been in places where I don't speak the language, but you can communicate. It's easy to do. Some of it's like playing charades, but you can communicate, and the longer you talk to people, the better your language skills get, and the better their English skills became. Can I speak Vietnamese now? Absolutely not. I don't even remember those. I did a stint for about 10 years doing school security in Westminster. And we had a lot of Vietnamese students there. And when they were talking, I would pick up a word every now and then. Not enough really to know what they were talking about, but and I couldn't remember the words. Once I heard it, I could remember it. But I've lost that through non-use. So that was a life of combined action Marine. And this just repeated over and over again. Day after day. I mean, that was our life. I'm going to bore you with a couple of statistics here, and I know those are boring, so I'm just going to gloss over them. The Combined Action Program was the smallest, most elite unit the Marine Corps had during the Vietnam War. We made up 3% of the Marines in Vietnam during the year 1967, when the statistics were taken during that full year. So there weren't many of us during the entire Vietnam War, the total of 5,000 Combined Action Marines. Out of that 5,000, almost half of them were killed in action. Of those that survived, there are estimated about 1,200 left alive here in the United States. And have any of you ever heard about the Combined Action Program before today? There aren't many people to talk to about it. There aren't many of us around to talk about it, so I'm not surprised that most of you never heard of it. During the year 1967, even though we made up 3% of the Marines in South Vietnam, we accounted for 47% of the enemy killed. We saw action daily. When we were on our patrols, patrol the village, ambushes, we saw combat virtually every day. The statistics were that most Marines saw combat once, maybe twice a week. General Forces of Vietnam in total saw combat a couple times a month. And I never realized that till years and years later when I was reading a book. I thought everybody fought the same kind of war I did, that you went out and saw combat every day. That's just what I thought was there. Okay, enough for statistics, that's it. I want to talk a little bit about our particular unit. We were at this small village. There were 13 of us, and we did our daily patrols. Give me a second here. I take some meds that give me dry mouth, so bear with me. We generally encountered Viet Cong, guerrilla warriors who were not very well trained. They weren't really committed to the cause, most of them. They were just there because they were coerced into being there. And we held our own really well with the Viet Cong. Our PFs were definitely more motivated and better trained and equipped than the Viet Cong. I got to the Combined Action Unit in the summer of 1967, late summer of 1967, and things went on. I mean, things were pretty good. We, have a casualty every now and then, but things moved on. In November 1967, we started seeing heavy North Vietnamese regular soldier troop buildups. Now, these guys were supplied by the Communist China, and they had equipment and weapons that matched ours. They had training. I mean, these were real soldiers we were facing. They weren't the local Viet Cong guerrilla warriors. Yes, step aside from that, give you a little tidbit. I was very uneducated when I went to Vietnam. Well, not uneducated, unaware of the world. In fact, it was after I got home that I actually looked on a map and saw where Vietnam was. I didn't even know where it was in the world, just over there somewhere. But I got there, and about a month into my stay in Vietnam, I went to the sergeant and said, "So when are we going to encounter these guerrillas?" And he said, "Well, we've been fighting every day." I said, "I haven't seen any." And yeah, I was thinking Gorrilla for guerrillas. I had no idea what these other kind of guerrillas were. I had no clue. I'd never heard of my sheltered life here in Colorado, in Denver. So we're not dealing with these guerrillas anymore, and we're actually starting to run into fairly decent-sized units of North Vietnamese regular soldiers that are well equipped. We're starting to see maybe company size, 40, 50 North Vietnamese regulars out at night when we're doing our patrols or ambushes. And remember again, there's 3 Marines and about 15 PFs. And we're starting to encounter these size of units, and we're getting a little nervous. I mean, Marines are badass. I mean, that's all there is to it. And we can take care of our own. We're always outnumbered. That's no big deal. But when you start being outnumbered like 50 to 3, you start saying, wait a minute, this gets a little unnerving. So in November of 1967, we stopped sending the PFs out at night. And we left the PFs back in the village to do village protection overnight, and the whole squad of Marines went out on patrol because we just didn't feel comfortable with these teenagers fighting against the North Vietnamese regulars. Things got to the point where we went out on one patrol in November 1967, and there were 13 of us that went out. 3 of us survived that patrol that night. We screwed up big time. We walked right into an ambush, and when it was over, 3 of us got out, and we didn't have a chance to return fire. 3 of us, the they did the ambush, they sort of hit and run, they did it and left. And I'd like to say I was the best Marine of the bunch, and that's why I lived, but no, it was dumb luck. The three of us that survived, it was just pure dumb luck. So I got called, at that time I was a corporal, I got called back to Camp Low, where our headquarters was, and the first sergeant said, so what do you think about your village? I said, well, I don't think there's much left there. He said, well, we're going to reinforce it, and what are your plans? Now, it was time for me to go home very shortly. I arrived in Vietnam in November 1966, about 6 months after I graduated from high school. Now, those of you who don't know about Vietnam, it was a war that we never committed to win. We sent people there for a tour, and then they came home. There was no commitment to go fight it to the end. Anybody except for Marines that served in Vietnam had a 12-month tour. They served 12 months in Vietnam. Well, of course, the Marines were the badasses. The commandant said, hey, if the Army and the Navy and the Air Force can do 12 months, we're going to do 13 months. So if you talk to a Marine veteran of Vietnam, they served 13 months of their tour, and everybody else served 12. That's part of the brainwashing of being a Marine. I mean, that's just the way it is. You're the baddest there is. And one of our mottos was, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. I'm the meanest SOB in the valley. All those things, they're just sort of comical by themselves, but that's what makes a Marine. It's a state of mind. It's not necessarily physical training or anything else. It's a state of mind where you think that. I am the baddest. But when you start getting large numbers of well-trained soldiers, that's what, stop and think about it. Well, the first sergeant said, what are your plans? You're going to go home next month. I said, I'm not going home. I'm here to win this thing. He said, that's what I was hoping you'd say. He said, I'm going to send you back to your village, and you'll be in charge. You're promoted to sergeant. My first comment was, first sergeant, I'm 19 years old. I'm not old enough. I'm not ready to be a Marine sergeant. And he said, yes, you are. You've spent a year in combat. You spent some time in recon, which is the Marine Corps Special Forces, so like Green Beret. He said, and you also spent a lot of time in the Combined Action Program. He said, you're my sergeant. I don't care how old you are. You've got the skills I need and the experiences I need for you to be a sergeant. So I got sent back to my village, and we got reinforcements. We got things trained up. We were doing real well, and then we're out on these patrols. We still don't let the PFs out after dark. About January 25th, I think was the date, somewhere in the late part of January, we're starting to see regimental size North Vietnamese units. And we're talking here, what, 2,500, 3,000 men? And these are well equipped. These guys know what they're doing. And and then we get intelligence reports that says there are a couple of divisions of North Vietnamese soldiers just north of DMZ. We don't know what they're doing, but they're getting ready to do something. And we sat down with village elders and decided that it probably isn't a good idea for us to stay here. We're bad, we know that. We don't mind being outnumbered, but if even one of these divisions, 40, 50,000 men come across the DMZ, we won't be a speed bump. I mean, that didn't worry us. I mean, when I went to Vietnam, dying in combat was something that was a reality to me. I thought that was a very good possibility. So I wasn't afraid of the prospect, but we knew these people. We knew them very well. They were really good friends of ours, the Vietnamese people. So we made the decision that we're going to withdraw from here. The Combined Action is going to withdraw. If we stay here, there's going to be a battle, and it's going to be real bloody, and we're not going to do anything to strategically change the outcome of what's going on in this part of Vietnam. And if we stay here, we're all going to die. We know that. But the other part of it was, how many of these Vietnamese civilians are going to die because we're trying to fight this force where we have no chance. So we decided to just abandon the village and go back to our headquarters in Cam Lo. And Cam Lo isn't on this map. It is on the handout. You can see where Cam Lo is. That's where our headquarters was. And at that time, And this was about the 25th of January. At that time, the Marine Corps instituted a curfew that no unit smaller than a company size, platoon size, could go out after dark. We didn't want small units out of a base after dark. There were about, 8 or 10 people there at Camp Low that were our headquarters. That's where our commanding officer was, that's where the first sergeant was, the clerk that did everything, all the administrative things were there. And on the night of February 1st of 1968, we had about 30 Marines there. There was one Marine Corps unit, a rifle squad, that was out, and they got cut off from their unit when dark came. So they came into our compound and stayed in the compound with us that night. We had
In the beginning, was your village picked for a strategic reason, the location of it?
The location was very important, and also it had been really picked over by the Viet Cong. It was one where the people requested us. They knew about it. They requested us. They wanted us there, and it wasn't a strategic location that we didn't want the enemy to take over, and that's where it was headed. The whole idea was try to keep that village on our side. So there were about 30 Marines there at Cam Low the night of February 1st. We had a pretty decent compound. We had sandbag walls about yay high. Compound was about 50 yards square, about a half football field. Around in the sandbag walls, on each corner and halfway down each wall, we would build a bunker. Dig a hole in the ground, sandbags about that tall on top of it, a firing slit out the front. Outside that, we had concertina wire. Those of you who don't know what concertina wire is, it's the nasty stuff you see at jails and prisons. Not barbed wire, but the razor sharp edges on concertina wire. It comes in coils, probably about that tall. We had a three-strand concertina wire around our compound. We put two side by side and stacked a third one on top. So we had this concertina wire about this high, and outside of that, we had the engineers would come in and push the jungle back, and we had probably 30-yard field of fire. We could see 30 yards away. We weren't, hidden in the jungle anymore. We had claymore mines set up in this clearing area. Now, claymore mine is a mine it's a box about this big, about that tall. It's sort of a semicircle like this, slightly arced. The back half of it is C4 plastic explosive, and the front part of it is ragged BBs, a piece of metal about the size of BBs. And there's a little hole on the top of it. You put a blasting cap in, and you run your wire back into the compound, into the bunkers. So if the enemy start attacking, you hit the plunger, and this thing goes off, and pretty effective. They do a pretty good job of clearing the field in front of them. Single use. You can't reuse them, but we had those spread out around outside the compound. And then very close to the trees, we had trip flares set up. Trip flare, let's see. Imagine a giant pop bottle rocket, shoots up into the air, it's got a parachute, it's got a big flare hanging from it. For 3 to 5 minutes, depending on wind or anything, it illuminates the area so you can see what's going on. So we're in this compound, we're feeling pretty good. We've got some pretty good defenses. Instead of 12 Marines, we got 30. And things are looking good. About 2 o'clock in the morning on February 2nd, we started receiving incoming mortar and rocket fire. We all headed out. We'd pre-assigned locations where we were going to go if something ever happened. I grabbed my M16 and headed for a bunker on the northwest corner of our compound, and looked out, and the trip flares started going off, and 2 million North Vietnamese soldiers were charging us. Maybe an exaggeration. When you look up and you see the horizon, your whole field of vision is the enemy. It looks like 2 million, trust me. trip flares start going off. We start setting up the Claymore mines, and we hold ourselves pretty well. The guy down the wall from me, in the middle of the wall, was a machine gunner, an infantry machine gunner. He had an M60 machine gun, excuse me, and he was doing a pretty good job. I mean, he was pretty effective there. Shortly into the battle, I was shot in the shoulder twice, small arms fire. Nothing big, just tissue damage, no bone damage, no nerve damage, just a little blood, through and through wounds, just through the flesh. I continued fighting, but time means nothing to me, so I'm not going to tell you how much longer it was. Sometime later, my M16 exploded in my hand. My hand was broken in 22 places. I've had reconstructive surgery, joint replacement, and it works pretty good. This finger here doesn't have a good tendon for it. That's not a big deal. That's awesome. If I go to, when I go to England and have tea with the Queen, I got it, perfect etiquette. So, not everything's for the worse. At that point, I don't know why it exploded. We had cases of ammunition in these bunkers. Maybe it had overheated. More likely it got hit by an RPG, a rocket propelled grenade. But when I got to the hospital, the trigger was hanging out of the back of my hand. I looked over, the machine gunner was still alive, but had been shot in the head, and he was totally ineffective. I started towards him, got about halfway to him. My rifle didn't work. I was unarmed at that point, so I was going to go over, take over his machine gun. I got about halfway to him, and I took 3 AK-47 rounds through the leg. At that point, I continued crawling on my elbows and knees over to his position and took up firing. Let's see. We got to the point where the enemy was actually coming through the wire. We looked out in the beginning, we saw them coming in. They were carrying ladders, bamboo ladders. What are these ladders for? I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere. We realized real quick what the ladders were for. Those that survived and got there, they threw the ladders over the top of the concertina wire, and it came to rest on the sandbag wall, and they just walked right in. And those defenses were totally useless. We were being overrun, and one of my guys found a radio that was working and called it an airstrike, an airburst airstrike. Now, an airburst airstrike, for those who aren't familiar with it, the artillery comes in, it gets about 15, 20 feet from the ground, it explodes and rains shrapnel down on everything. It's a fairly effective technique. He called it in, and they asked him to verify his coordinates. And he said, yeah, the coordinates are right. That's my flagpole. We're being overrun. And he spread the word, and all the Marines went in the bunkers, and the airburst went off, and everything was fine. Killed quite a few of the North Vietnamese. Those that didn't kill, they took off. Felt pretty good about it. Well, they just regrouped and started back a second time. And second time, same thing all over again, same results. There was a third time that somehow I didn't get the word about it. I didn't get a chance to go to my bunker. I was probably deaf from all the artillery going off. Loud noises, but I was out in the open when that third round went off. I was wearing a flak jacket, pretty thick bulletproof vest type thing. The artillery round went off behind me, and I had 62 pieces of shrapnel penetrate the flak jacket into my back. And I was pretty much done for at that point. Not too long after that, we were totally overrun. I mean, we'd expended everything we had, as far as the Claymore mines and those things went. I was laying on my side and had a North Vietnamese soldier come by with a rifle and a bayonet. He ran a bayonet in here and it came out the front. And at that point, I was left for dead. I got the best of him, though. I still had my K-bar, my Marine combat knife, and I was able to, I grabbed his rifle, came over, grabbed his rifle, and pulled him down the ground, and I slit his throat. He died, I didn't. So I won that one. So, reinforcements finally got there. After the battle was gone, the Vietnamese soldiers, they left and went somewhere else. I don't know where, but I didn't care. The next thing I remember after that was laying there with a Navy corpsman, and he looked at me and said, "Man, you're bleeding to death internally." It looked like I was about 9 months pregnant. And he said, "We're going to have to do something about this." So, and corpsmen aren't that well trained. They're probably less trained than an EMT is today. They're good. I mean, they save lives. They're great, but they're not doctors. He took a razor and cut me from here to here, and had me hold the incision open. I had one finger still attached, the important one. That was still functional, so I was able to hold the incision open. Now, he had no morphine left, so no anesthetic, no nothing. And he got in there and said, "I think this is your spleen, and I'm pretty sure you can live without it, but you got 2 big holes in it where a bayonet went through it. You're bleeding to death." So he took my spleen out, took sewing thread, tied off the blood vessels, and packed me full of gauze, didn't even try to close me back up. Took this thing he took out of me, put it in a plastic bag, and put it on the stretcher with me. I got medevaced to Cam Bay. Well, eventually. I got medevaced first to Dong Ha, where the headquarters of the 3rd Marine Division was. And I had a really nice watch. Zodiac Seawolf. That was the watch of the day back in the 60s. That was the top of the line. I think I paid like $100 for it. And that was big money when back then. I remember laying there, and triage, I think you're all familiar with what triage is. You decide who you're going to treat and who you're not going to treat. I got black tagged and put over here, he's not going to make it. And somebody from the field hospital there came over and said, "Oh, this guy's not going to make it." And I remember vividly him going through my pockets, taking my watch and what little bit of Vietnamese money I had on me, and take off. And I think psychologically I convinced, I'm not going to die. I'm going to get through this and find that SOB. Never did, but after I was stabilized a little bit there, I got flown down to Cam Bay and spent a few weeks in Cam Bay. Well, when I got to the hospital, the doctor looked at me and he's holding this plastic bag and said, "What the hell happened to you?" I told him my story, and he said, "That corpsman was a brave man. I don't think I would have done that in the field under those conditions." He said, "Bottom line is, that's your spleen. You can live without it, and based on your blood volume, when you got here and the size of the holes in your spleen, you were within minutes or possibly seconds of bleeding out." That was February 1968. I spent quite a bit of time in the hospital, a fair portion of it as an outpatient. I was finally retired from the Marine Corps as a sergeant out at Fitzsimmons. They discharged from the hospital, and of course, that's another story about the Marines. Marines take care of themselves. They don't rely on anybody else. I mean, that's just part of the brainwashing thing. So I got sent to Oakland Naval Hospital because the Marine Corps is the department of the Navy. The men's department, by the way. But so I was sent there to Oakland. My family came to visit me in Oakland, and I was getting stabilized, and they wanted me to come home to Fitzsimmons out in Aurora. And they wouldn't send me to Fitzsimmons. That's an Army hospital. We can't send a Marine to an Army hospital. My parents were divorced, but both of them independently started contacting congressmen and senators, and that's what it took to get to Fitzsimmons. And when I got there were like a dozen of us, a dozen Marines there, and there were a lot of patients there at Fitzsimmons at the time. I found out, talking to them, that's how they all got there. I mean, it took congressional intervention to get a Marine into an Army hospital. But that goes back to the whole brainwashing psychological thing that Marines do. I was medically retired on May 19th, 1970, to 27 months after my last battle in Vietnam. Now, I want to open this up for questions now. That's what I did my first couple of years out of high school. I was there at a time when we were going to Vietnam to win the war. 1966. March 8th, 1965 were the first combat troops that went into Vietnam. So we were very early into the war. We all had this idea that we were there to win. The whole complex, the complexion of the Marines that were coming into Vietnam in mid to late 1967 was totally different than those of us that had been here earlier. At that point, guys were coming over and their goal was to survive their tour and come home. And that doesn't sound like much, but the difference in mindset, I was there to win the war. They were there to survive and go home. So the whole complexion of the war started changing in mid to late 1967. We were gung-ho. We were going to win the war. General Walt, who was the commander of the 3rd Marine Division, said, you give me one more, in 1967, he said, you give me one more division of Marines, we'll be in Hanoi and have this war over in 30 days. A lot of Monday morning quarterbacks since then have said he was optimistic. That seriously, it would have taken 60 to 90 days, but it could have been done. I'm talking about the College of Warfare. I'm not talking about Marines boasting. That could have happened. We had the manpower and the will to do it at that time, but this little gray area here, the DMZ, we wouldn't cross it. So the war continued on another 8 years. After that, we never did go on the offensive. So that mindset was a little different. So you're going to hear people talk about Vietnam or talk to people about Vietnam. Their story is not going to be like mine at all. There were several different wars being fought there. There was the one where early in Vietnam where we were there fighting to win, that attitude. Later, people were trying to survive. We didn't have any drug issues at all when I was there. It happened later with all the troops, and I'm not sure if I'd been part of that if I were a couple of years younger. I got there a couple of years later. It had to be really terrible to be there knowing that you're not going to win this war. We're just here, don't know why. I just want to survive and go home. The other part of it is where you were located. I was right up here in the highlands, in the jungle, in the mountains. So the war I fought was totally different than the war in Saigon. In Saigon, it was a city, so some people fought in cities. I fought in the jungle. So there were a lot of different parts of the war and a lot of different experiences from different people. Yes?
Was the assault on your camp, was that the beginning or part of the Tet?
That was the beginning of the Tet Offensive. Yes, ma'am. That's when it all started. That's what these troops amassing across the border were there to do. We didn't know what it was going to be, but just knew something big was happening. Yes?
It mentions here that part of your training before you went overseas was in scuba diving and underwater demolition.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever get involved in anything
No.
like that? Just curious.
The Marine Corps didn't have a lot of specialty schools of its own at that time, so they farmed us out. I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, to the Army Ranger School, and we did the Army Ranger School. And that's where I got my jump qualification, my parachute qualifications. And then they said, well, you never know what's going to happen. We better get you qualified. So we were at the Navy SEAL School. We didn't complete the Navy SEAL. We weren't Navy SEAls by any stretch of the imagination, but we did a lot of training there to get the scuba certification. Now remember, this is very early in the war. We don't know if something's going to happen offshore. We may be needed in rivers, so they were just covering all their bases. We never ended up using it, but they didn't know. They wanted to train for any eventuality.
Of all of your injuries, what was the worst?
I don't know. What's probably be the worst? This is my wife here. She's lived.
It's kind of a laundry basket. It all affects them every day. It affects our whole family every day.
The psychological part is the worst part. I suffer from PTSD. I take meds, and that's the toughest part. It's tougher than the physical things. You can learn to deal with those and cope with them. Mitch?
I got to tell you one thing too. I worked with Don for over 20 years, and he, I don't know if there was ever a day that I didn't know something about the shrapnel wounds that he had, the treatments that he had to go through all the time.
I've been in the hospital since then, having shrapnel removed from me. When shrapnel goes in, it's red hot and it burns its way in and forms a scar tissue sac around it, and you're fine. I mean, it hurts, but you're in good shape. But if something happens and time goes by and the piece of shrapnel shifts a little bit and gets to where blood can get to it, then you get oxygen into it from your bloodstream, and it festers, and there becomes a big massive infection, like a giant zit. And you have to have those surgically removed from time to time. Yeah.
You set off alarms at the airports when you went
Yes, sir, I do. And my back is deformed from shrapnel holes, and when I go through the x-ray thing, you hold your hands up. They got to take me aside and pat me down, because you don't look normal here. I can tell you what level of security is. I don't care what the sign says, but I can tell you what the level of security is at the airport. If I don't set off the buzzer, security is low. When security is high, I set off the buzzer. I mean, I can tell you what the state of emergency is.
Have you been back to Vietnam?
I have not.
Any desire?
Off and on. I don't know. Part of it tells me that it's not the Vietnam I left. I wouldn't experience anything. And then the other part is I'd like to see the country now, because when I left, we pretty much destroyed the landscape. And when I got there, it was a beautiful, beautiful place. And I would like to go back and see the landscape, and it was gorgeous.
Have you ever linked up with your corpsman?
He committed suicide. I got contacted by his son-in-law, 10 years ago? He tracked me down, and being a corpsman is, a medic is, they had the highest suicide rate of anybody in Vietnam. Their job was to save life. Nurses, corpsmen, they're there to save lives, and they couldn't save them all. They had a lot of people they couldn't save that they're living with. My job was to kill people. I was pretty good at it. So, the mental stress that the corpsmen and the medics and the nurses had to deal with was just tremendous.
Have you written a book?
No,
Are you going to?
probably not.
He wrote a poem,
I did.
a very short one.
Yeah.
Do you remember it?
Nope.
You were excited?
Nope. That's all I got.
So, a couple things real quick. I want to tip my Army hat to Don, and not just thank him for his service, but thank him for what he did and for what he means to the community, to humanity in general. Also, I want you to know that there are several of us here in the museum that are Vietnam veterans. Lou Moyer, myself, and interestingly, all three of us were in Vietnam in 1968. Okay, Lou happened to be flying over all of us at a B-52 at the time, but I was also there in 1968 during the Tet Offensive. Now, certainly, and with all due respect and admiration for Don, I didn't have it nearly as tough as he did, and again, all respect to Don. I appreciate what he went through. I was in, here, let me look at the map real quick.
Yes.
I was right here in Quang Nhân, between the Central Highlands and Quang Nhân. I was very fortunate because I had 2 Army divisions and a Korean division to keep me comfortable and safe. But frankly, that time was really, really difficult because the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong just really attacked the entire country all at once. And when I did a talk back earlier this year, there was a map that shows that coordinated attack by the North Vietnamese, where it had these interestingly red dots in every single city and town in the country where that attack on the evening of the 30th and the morning of the 1st, just simultaneously all at once. And it was interesting because they did it very well, but the good news was that both the Army and the Marines launched a counterattack, which, as Don says, we should have won, but unfortunately we didn't. We had them on the run right afterwards in the months following, but it didn't work out, unfortunately. But it was an interesting attack that was launched, but we didn't prevail. Again, unfortunately.
We won the battle. We won Tet.
Certainly won the battle, for sure. But anyway, I also want to present Don a Museum Challenge coin.
Thank
for
you.
being our speaker today. And again, thank you for coming. It was a great talk. It was very informative.
Just a quick note, our emergency here, when it all came in, it was in good shape.
Oh.
Everything's back to normal.
Oh, good. Again, thank you very much. And Don, thank you very much. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.